Welcome to the Bravosity, the shining light in your dark night, half asleep scrolling. The channel where we're going to be looking at games old and new, awful or astounding. I'm Brevin from the Bravosity, and in this episode, we're going to be delving into the development of what could have been the most bone chilling role playing game ever made Aliens Crucible, created by the best boys in the RPG biz, makers of Fallout New Vegas, Knights of the Old Republic 2, Pillars of Eternity, The Outer Worlds, and what's what's the one? Um, Grounded? Is that something like that? Yeah, but before we get further into the video, though, all of the information I talk about was found from comments made by Anthony Davis, the lead animator on Crucible, as well as a 13-minute long leaked gameplay video that you're seeing right now. If you like this video, like it, share it, and subscribe because you know you love some RPGs. I can feel it in my bones. Now, on with the analysis. Horror hasn't seen many role-playing video games in its history, with a few notable exceptions. Vampire, Call of Cthulhu, and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Yeah, two vampire games. Quality work, quality YouTubing right here. But those are the only ones I've played personally. Each one of these RPGs brought its own thing to the table, while all having respective issues that held each one back from being great. And while they were all horror themed, none of them were particularly scary. Bloodlines does have one of the scariest sections I've ever played in a game, but it's only a very small section in that game. Obsidian wanted to make a game that felt entirely like that section of Bloodlines. Aliens Crucible, they wanted to make an RPG that would make you feel the fear of the big black looped up boys, the titular alien, aka Xenomorph. But then, overambition, management woes, publishing disputes, crunch, 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 all that would mean that Obsidian wouldn't be able to see their horrifying vision through. Now, years after its cancellation, I'm taking a dive into Aliens Crucible, and we're going to speculate on the game we could have gotten. At the tail end of 2006, Sega announced that Obsidian Entertainment, the same guys who would go on to make the pulpy corporate satire The Outer Worlds years later, would be developing an RPG based on the Alien franchise. Later on, they'd name it Aliens Crucible. Could Crucible have been on par with Obsidian's greatest work, or was it a good thing it never saw the light of day? Crucible would have been a cinematic RPG that focused on character interactions and third-person shooter combat with a small party of companions to back you up, aka the BioWare Bisque, a favorite of Spiders, the developer, not the arachnid. Crucible would have taken place on a planet known as Caldera. Although not much is clear on what this planet would be, we do know it contained Weyland-Yutani research centers, of course, that also, of course, have completely failed at containing exotic forms of our creepy crawling little friends, the xenomorphs. The main drive of the game would be to escape this now infested caldera. The horror element of the game came in more than just creeps and jump scares, though. According to interviews with the developers, in some build of the games, your companions could permanently die if killed, and the same went for your character. Although it's unclear if they would have made this a similar difficulty to Watch Dogs Legion or XCOM, sort of Iron Man mode. There's also a vast amount of mechanics Obsidian could have put in to make this permadeath add to the horror, without being too overbearing. Although whether these would have worked, well, is anyone's guess. I actually find the permadeath of companions far more interesting than the player death, though. It's very reminiscent of Mass Effect 2's suicide mission. People loved that game, and especially the ending, because of the fact that all these amazing characters that the game had fleshed out over the game, and you had gotten to know and care for, could die, and it was all your fault. Crucible sought to create a similar feeling, but through a longer period of the game. A fantastic idea for a horror title and a brilliant way of blending these styles of games. There were said to be scenarios in which your companions could get face hugged, and you would have to either kill them straight up or put them in a sleeper chamber periodically, which could possibly postpone the baby birthing chestplosion of your favorite companion for an undisclosed amount of time. The idea behind this was to make every fight tense and give gravity to the combat, get your heart pumping and your hands shaking in fear. They could have had plenty of other systems that you could have had access to as well, considering this is an RPG. It could have opened up some interesting avenues of gameplay for Crucible as a horror game. They could have included stealth, allowing for tense sneaking past hordes of bloodthirsty xenomorphs who could finish off your best friend who just told you about his beautiful wife and child. A hacking or engineering skill type could allow you to kill the creatures or keep them contained from remote areas. This is just speculation, though, based on other Obsidian titles and RPGs of a similar ilk. Speaking of companions, though, Crucible had a pretty cool seeming focus on your companions. Although you'd have to protect them from getting ripped apart and melted, they were also supposed to be an important asset in your arsenal. Companions would attack your enemies in combat, of course, but they would also have abilities you could access via a quick wheel, similar to Mass Effect. But a big difference between Crucible and Mass Effect's companion abilities was that Crucible's companions could help you in more unique RPG-like ways, like welding a door shut to keep the Xenos at bay, or blowing a door open to ambush some others. We can assume, given it is an RPG, that your companions would have had plenty of unique dialogue as well. There's a moment in the leaked gameplay where we see the player character is just an absolute jerk to his companion. Speaking of which, you would need a player character, of course, and the player character in Crucible was at least somewhat customizable from what we've seen in the gameplay, with some different faces to choose from, a la something like KOTOR. And while it is unclear whether or not Crucible would have been a class-based RPG, we see in the gameplay footage you would have had multiple different backgrounds you could have chosen, which would have had small skill boosts connected to them. Also showing us that Crucible would have included a skill system, which we would have most likely assigned some points to when making our guide. And you would of course have dialogue options during conversations, although I don't believe we see any dialogue skill checks in the gameplay video. I'm sure there would have been a loot system of some sort, but we don't really have many other details on the gameplay mechanics that the player would have at their disposal. All these different systems we know about seem to be trying to create an intense, engaging, and choice-filled RPG. But it's unclear, with the information we have, if these systems would have come together to make an interesting game. But a lot of people on the internet seem to really think they were onto something special with Crucible. And I agree, but only after many fan patches. While the explanations from developers and footage of gameplay truly intrigues and excites me, I fear Crucible fell victim to the problems that most Obsidian games have. Overambition, feature creep, and a lack of a cohesive vision. Alpha Protocol, Obsidian's super spy RPG, was released in 2010, the same year Crucible would be canceled. Alpha Protocol was an interesting but overambitious game that had a lot of problems that I think Alien's Crucible would have had as well. While it had plenty of merits, Obsidian has had an iffy history with gunplay, and Alpha Protocol is absolutely awful. When it comes to gunplay, that is. Which makes me think that Crucible's gunplay wouldn't have been up to par with shooters at the time. Add permadeath of you or your companions to that pot, and I could see this game ending up being much more aggravating than terrifying. Companions back then and even now have been notoriously janky, especially in RPGs that have a lot of mechanics for them to use. And the AI just wasn't there yet for this idea to work. You'd have needed a very hefty amount of development time to go on companion AI. I think Crucible could have ended up feeling like a 10 to 30 hour long escort quest, which just sounds torturous and not in the way it's intending. This was all just a symptom of a larger problem at Obsidian, though. Going back to Alpha Protocol once more, most of the problems with it came from the lack of creative director on the project or any Obsidian project up to that point. With no leader, the projects were too ambitious for their own good, almost always having systems that were barely used, and a final act that always felt rushed and disappointing. This is still a problem they have today, even with creative directors. Final act was a large complaint I had seen on About the Outer Worlds, Obsidian's newest and best-selling game. While Josh Sawyer was appointed as creative director late into the development of Crucible, I fear it was too late at this point. And so this absence of direction is what led to the cancellation of Crucible in April of 2010. With all that said though, I wish Alien's Crucible was finished, because just like Obsidian's other projects, the ambition would have shined through the jank, and given a very unique experience for Alien and RPG fans alike. Just like KOTOR 2 gave an unforgettable but obviously unfinished Star Wars experience years prior. Just like KOTOR 2 and Alpha Protocol, even if Alien's Crucible released in a buggy state, fan patches could have given us the experience we wanted years down the line. Although, as we see, even after the fan patches and restoration mods, some of the games still end up feeling like unfinished masterpieces, a half-painted Mona Lisa, if you will. But I still find it sad we'll never get to find out if Aliens Crucible would have been the horror RPG we all wanted, or just another disappointment to follow Colonial Marines. Despite the issues I've spoken about with the studio's development process, I absolutely love Obsidian Entertainment. I'm glad they're still around and doing better than ever with The Outer Worlds selling fantastically, and Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 getting huge hype on their trailers. Thanks for watching this episode on the Bravosity. If you enjoyed it, I would really appreciate you liking the video, sharing it with your friends who love RPGs or the Alien franchise, and subscribing to the Bravosity for more RPG and other gaming content. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram as well. Just check it out.